So on the Unit 2 test review, the first problem asks you to take these four graphs and match them to these four equations. So and then explain how you can tell it's a match without using the graphing calculator. So yeah, you could plug this into your graphing calculator and see which one matched, but your explanation is going to have to be about what clues you can get from the equation that don't involve using a graphing calculator. So the first thing, we're just going to go through, and this right here, we can say which form it's in, because each form gives a different kind of clue. This form is standard form, right? This form is factored form. This form is factored form, and this form is vertex form, right? So each form gives a clue about the graph. Now, this one here in standard form reveals the y-intercept, right? So the y-intercept for this one is -5. That c value is your y-intercept. So I know this one's going to have this equation is going to have, this graph is going to have a y-intercept of -5. Now, factored form, this easily reveals the x-intercepts. Because remember, if I write this equation as equal to 0, where y equals 0 is where this crosses the x-axis, right? So if I set this equal to 0 and then I set each factor equal to 0, x minus 2 equals 0, x minus 5 equals 0, and solve, add 2 to both sides, so x equals 2, add 5 to both sides, x equals 5, then I know that this particular equation has some x-intercepts at x equals 2 and x equals 5, okay? Same thing here, right? I want to solve this. I set each factor equal to 0. I'm going to do that up here. X plus 3 equals 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0. So x equals -3. And solving on this side, x equals 1/2. So my x-intercepts for this one are going to be x equals -3 and an x equals 1/2. And then the last one, this one's in vertex form. So it's going to reveal a vertex, that maximum or minimum. And remember, the vertex is happening, remember we take this as the opposite of this one is the x value, and the same as this is the y. So this one's going to have a vertex at +2, +3. So now that I've kind of seen what clues each graph gives, I'm going to see if I can match that up. So this one has a y-intercept of -5. This one's the only one. This graph over here, 4, is the only one that has a y-intercept that's negative, right? This has a y-intercept that's positive. This one would have a y-intercept that's positive. This one would be positive. This one's the only one with a negative intercept. So I'm going to say equation A matches S, graph S, because equation A has a y-intercept of -5, and graph S is the only graph with a negative y-intercept. So, I mean, your explanation might be a little different than that, but your explanation should be thorough enough that somebody can read it and understand how you got from here to knowing that this was the one. So here, for B, I need to find a graph with x-intercepts at +2 and +5. Okay, well, I've already canceled this one out. That's already been matched. This one has x-intercepts at a positive and a negative number, so it can't be 1. This one doesn't have any x-intercepts, right? That's one of those no solutions. So this one has to be it, right? So even though you guys don't see numbers here, right, there's enough information to know that this one has to be it, because this is the only one with x-intercepts at +2 and +5. So equation B matches graph 2. Oh, you know what? I said graph S, but I meant graph 4. This is graph 4, right, with point S. So equation B matches graph 2, this one, because factored form, and I'm going to just say this. You need to write out your explanation, but my explanation would say because factored form reveals the x-intercepts are at x equals 2 and x equals 5, and graph 2 is the only graph with 2 positive x-intercepts. So that's what I would write right here. So you need to fill in something for your explanation. Equation C. So equation C, again, we're looking for x-intercepts, one at -3, one at positive 1/2. That has to be this graph here. -3, positive 1/2, right? So even though I don't see those exact numbers, I can tell that this is the only one that fits that criteria. So equation C matches graph 1. Again, because factored form reveals x-intercepts at -3 and positive 1/2, and graph 1 is the only equation, the only graph that has something at a positive and a negative value. So you fill that explanation in. And then equation D. Equation D obviously has to match 3, but let's talk about why, right? Let's talk about why. Here you've got a vertex of 2, 3. Vertex is the smallest point, right? So if you notice, that's in the first quadrant. Over 2, up 3. Does this seem to have a vertex that matches that situation? Yes. Over here, notice this graph wouldn't have a positive 2, positive 3. This graph, the vertex is positive 2 and negative, or positive something and negative. This one's a negative and a negative and a negative, right? So even if we hadn't figured that other stuff out, you should have been able to tell that this one was the only one with a vertex in the first quadrant at positive 2, positive 3. So I'm going to say equation D matches 3 because vertex form reveals a vertex is at 2, 3, which is in the first quadrant. Graph 3 is the only graph in the first quadrant. You could also just say because it was the only one left. That's fair enough once you have a mix and match. Now here, write the coordinates. So here's the thing, is that you really have to understand what was revealed. So write the coordinates of point P. Well, remember, P matched up. So this is where you really need to know. I mean, P is graph 1. Graph 1 matched with C. And if you remember, C revealed the x-intercepts at -3 and 1/2. So point P has to be that value of x equals -3, right? But each point has a coordinate, right? So just because x equals -3, what does y equal? Well, you're on the x-axis. Y has to equal 0. So point P is the point -3, 0. And we know that because we use the equation to match it up. I say Q. So Q is right here. Remember, graph 2 matches with B, so we're looking here. And we know that it has x-intercepts at 2 and 5. So this is going to have to be the 2. This is going to have to be the 5, right? So I know that Q is happening at 5. But the thing is that that's not enough. I need a y value. What's my y value? If I'm at an x-intercept, it's 0. I'm not up or down. So 5, 0 is Q. R. We just talked about this, right? This graph 3 matched that vertex equation, and we knew that that was 2, 3, right? So R is 2, 3. And then S was matched over here with this equation right here. And we know that that's happening, the y value, it's crossing at y equals -5. So down here, S, y equals -5. This is the y coordinate down here. What's the x value though? What's the x value? 0, because I'm not moving right or left. So 0, -5. So this right here is something you need to be able to do on the test. It's just like that quiz we took the other day. So this is the kind of thing that you need to really practice at, either looking at the quiz or doing the things, being able to use these to identify which graph and then figure out which the point. Use the equation to give you information about the graph.